She did not do that by accident. Whatever just happened between you and her, the comment that seemed designed to provoke you, the sudden coldness that appeared out of nowhere, the moment she challenged something you said when you were both previously having a perfectly fine conversation, the way she tested your reaction to something that had nothing to do with what you were actually talking about, she did not do that by accident. And the fact that you reacted the way you did, whether you got defensive or you got anxious, or you immediately tried to fix it, or you agreed with something you absolutely did not agree with just to restore the peace, that was not an accident either. Here is the thing that nobody in your life has ever sat down and actually explained to you. What just happened between you was not a conflict. It was not a sign that she is difficult or irrational or that the relationship has a problem. What just happened was a test, an ancient unconscious, completely involuntary evaluation that has been running in women for thousands of years. And your response, in the 10 seconds after it happened, told her more about who you actually are than 6 months of your best behavior ever could. And depending on how you responded, she either moved closer to you in ways she cannot explain, or she moved further away, also in ways she cannot explain. This video is about why women test men, what they are actually looking for when they do, and the specific quality in your response that determines whether you pass or fail, not just in her eyes, but in your own. Welcome to Prime Within. If you are new here, pull up a chair. If you have been here a while, you already know this is the channel that tells men the truth, the kind of truth that actually changes how you move through the world. If that is what you came for, please subscribe right now. Hit that button before we go further, because what I am about to share is the kind of information that changes how every single relationship in your life works, not just romantic ones. Subscribe now. Let's get into it. Dr. John Gottman is not a dating coach. He is not a pickup artist. He is not a self-help author who figured out attraction in his 30s and decided to monetize it. He is a research psychologist who spent over 40 years studying what actually happens between human beings in relationships. Not what people say happens, not what feels true, but what the data reveals when you put cameras in rooms and measure physiological responses and track patterns across thousands of couples over decades. His work at the University of Washington's Love Lab, a name that sounds whimsical, but describes a place where some of the most rigorous relationship science in history was conducted, produced findings that were so specific and so counterintuitive that when he presented them to academic conferences, other researchers accused him of fabricating the results. He could watch 15 minutes of a couple interacting, 15 minutes, no prior history, no context, and predict with 93.6% accuracy whether that couple would divorce within the next 15 years. Not approximately, not roughly, 93.6%. The accuracy of a cardiologist reading an EKG. And what he was reading in those 15 minutes was not whether the couple argued. It was not whether they were physically affectionate. It was not whether they had compatible personalities or shared interests or aligned values. He was reading something far more specific, far more invisible, and far more directly related to everything we are going to discuss today. He was reading how a man responded under pressure, how he handled moments of friction, challenge, and emotional intensity, whether his nervous system stayed regulated when hers was activated, whether his identity remained stable when it was questioned, whether the version of himself he presented in the calm moments was the same man who showed up in the difficult ones. That The consistency of a man under pressure is what Gottman's research revealed as the single most predictive variable in relationship success. And it is exactly what women are. Gottman identifies what he calls the 4 horsemen for specific behaviors that appear in relationship conflict and predict breakdown with devastating reliability: contempt, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling. And what is fascinating about these 4 behaviors, from the perspective of what we are discussing today, is that 3 of the 4 are direct responses to feeling tested. Defensiveness, the most common male response to a perceived test, is the behavior of a man who has interpreted a challenge to his behavior as a challenge to his identity. He does not hear, "That thing you did bothered me." He hears, "You are not enough." And his response to that perceived attack is to defend, to explain, to justify, to make the case for his own adequacy in a way that, paradoxically, communicates exactly the inadequacy he was trying to hide. Think about what defensiveness actually broadcasts to a woman who is paying attention. It says, "My sense of self is fragile enough that your challenge threatened it." It says, "I need you to believe I am right more than I need to understand what you experienced." It says, "I am not grounded enough to hear feedback without treating it as an attack." And from a woman's perspective, from the perspective of a woman who is asking beneath consciousness, "Can I trust this man to stay solid when things get hard?" Defensiveness is a complete answer to the test. It answers no. He cannot. He requires calm conditions and constant agreement to stay regulated. Remove those things, and the person who showed up is no longer the person I was attracted to. Now here is the pattern interrupt. The man who passes the test does not pass it by having the perfect response. He does not pass it by being slick or clever or by saying the exact right thing. He passes it by staying himself, by responding from the same grounded, unhurried, genuinely present place he occupies in comfortable moments, because his identity does not become unstable under friction. His nervous system does not escalate just because hers did. His sense of who he is does not require her to be agreeable in order to remain intact. That quality, emotional regulation under relational pressure, is not a technique. It is not a skill you learn in a weekend. It is the natural expression of a man who has done enough internal work that there is a real foundation beneath the surface, and it is the thing she is looking for every time she tests. Let me give you real examples of what tests actually look like, because most men are being tested every day and do not recognize it as such, which means they are responding to the wrong thing entirely. The first type is what Gottman's work describes as the bid and the response. It does not look like a test. It looks like a small thing. She says something, a comment, an observation, a question, that is actually an invitation for connection. "You never seem to really listen when I talk about my day." That sounds like a complaint, but underneath it is a bid, a small, vulnerable reach toward him. And what she is testing, without framing it as a test, is whether he hears the bid or only the complaint. The man who fails responds to the surface. He defends his listening. He lists the times he listened. He becomes slightly colder because the comment felt unfair. He has failed not because he is a bad listener, but because he responded to the complaint and missed the person reaching toward him underneath it. The man who passes hears differently. He does not agree that he never listens, because that is not accurate, and agreeing with something inaccurate is not strength, it is people-pleasing. But he hears that she wants to feel heard right now. and he says something that demonstrates he is genuinely present rather than managing the situation. He creates the thing she was reaching for rather than defending against the criticism that was the surface of the reach. Same interaction. 2. Completely different internal orientations. The difference is not words. It is the specific quality of groundedness that allows one man to hear what is underneath what is being said. Right here, before we go further, I want to stop and be direct with you. If you are watching Prime Within and you have not subscribed yet, please do it now. Not because we are asking for numbers, because the men who subscribe are the men who come back to these concepts over and over. And these concepts take more than one encounter to change how you act. The second type of test is what Gottman calls the stress test. This one is less subtle. She says something that is designed, again not consciously, to provoke a reaction. She challenges a decision you made. She questions something you said you were going to do. She brings up something she knows creates friction between you. She pushes on the edge of a boundary. And here is the truth. Most men never hear about this type of test. She is not doing this to create conflict. She is not doing it because she is difficult or manipulative or testing your tolerance for bad behavior. She is doing it for the same reason a structural engineer stress tests a bridge before declaring it safe for traffic. She needs to know what you are made of when pressure is applied, not what you look like when everything is fine. What you are actually made of. The man who fails this test fails in one of two ways. The first failure is explosion. The man whose emotional regulation breaks under pressure, who becomes sharp or cold or aggressive, who lets the friction of the moment override his own values and his own standards. The woman who experiences this failure learns something specific and important. This man's warmth is conditional. Remove the comfortable conditions, and a different person shows up. That is not a man she can trust to be solid in the hard moments of a real life together. The second failure is collapse. The man who immediately concedes, who agrees with the challenge not because it is valid, but because the discomfort of friction is unbearable, who people-pleases his way through the moment at the cost of his own position. The woman who experiences this failure also learns something specific and important. This man does not have a core. His responses are shaped by whatever creates the least friction. That is also not a man she can trust, because a man with no core cannot hold anything when the wind changes. The pass, the response that Gottman's research consistently identifies in men whose relationships succeed and deepen, is neither explosion nor collapse. It is a third thing that has no dramatic name and generates no Instagram content, but is the most powerful thing a man can bring to a moment of relational friction. It is calm presence, the ability to be in the friction, to feel it, to not pretend it is not real, and to respond from his own center rather than from the emotional weather of the moment. To hear the challenge without treating it as an attack, to maintain his position when he genuinely holds it, and to update his position when the challenge is valid, but to do both from the same grounded place, governed by his own values rather than by the emotional intensity of the room. Now, let me connect this to something that most men have completely backwards in their understanding of attraction. The man who passes tests consistently, who stays grounded under relational pressure, who neither explodes nor collapses, is not the man who has figured out how to handle women. He is the man who has developed a relationship with himself that is stable enough to hold under external pressure. And the work that builds that stability is not relational work. It is personal work. Gottman's research reveals this indirectly but powerfully. The men in his studies whose relationships were most stable and most deeply satisfying were not the men who had the best communication skills in isolation. They were the men whose self-regulation, whose ability to manage their own emotional state independently, was most developed. Men who had genuine friendships, men who had meaningful work, men who had practices, physical, creative, contemplative, that maintained their internal equilibrium independent of the relationship. In other words, the men who passed tests consistently were the men who had lives, real, full, independently meaningful lives that were not primarily organized around the relationship. Because a man with a full life has something the relationship is added to, not the thing the relationship is supposed to provide. And a man with something to return to when the relationship is difficult is not dependent on the relationship to resolve itself in order for him to feel okay. That independence, that specifically masculine independence that is not coldness or unavailability, but genuine self-sufficiency, is the most consistently attractive quality Gottman's 40 years of research has identified in men in stable, deeply satisfying long-term relationships. Think about what this means practically. Every hour you spend building something real, training, building financial security, developing genuine skills, maintaining friendships that matter, is not time taken away from your relationship. It is time invested in the quality of man you are when you show up to your relationship. It is the work that builds the groundedness that allows you to stay solid when she tests. The work that makes passing the test natural rather than effortful. The work that makes you, in the truest sense, someone worth testing. Because only a man worth keeping is worth the effort of finding out what he is made of. Let me tell you about a moment that Barack Obama has described publicly. During the most pressure-filled period of his presidency, the 2011 killing of Osama bin Laden, Obama described sitting in the Situation Room with some of the highest-stakes decision-making in modern American history unfolding around him. Multiple advisors with conflicting assessments, incomplete information, enormous consequences attached to every possible choice. And what struck the people in the room, what multiple members of his national security team have since described in interviews and memoirs, was not the brilliance of his analysis. It was his stillness, his ability to sit with the pressure of the moment without being visibly overwhelmed by it, to ask questions calmly, to hear conflicting opinions without becoming reactive, to carry the weight of the decision without being bent by it. Michelle Obama, in her memoir Becoming, writes about what she fell in love with in Barack before any of the public life arrived. She writes about his groundedness, his ability to be completely present without being destabilized by what was happening around him, his patience, not the performed patience of a man managing his behavior, but the genuine patience of a man who was not easily rattled because he had a center of gravity that did not move. She was not describing a technique. She was describing the man that Barack had built himself to be through years of reading, discipline, genuine engagement with ideas and people, and the specific private work of developing a self-worth trusting. And she was attracted to it deeply, durably, in the way that creates a genuine partnership rather than a temporary infatuation, because it is exactly what Gottman's research identifies as the quality women are testing for. Are you the same man in the difficult moments that you were in the comfortable ones? Here is the most important practical insight I can give you from everything we have discussed today. The next time something happens in an interaction with a woman that feels like a test, and it will happen probably within the next 48 hours, I want you to resist the two default responses. Do not defend and do not collapse. Instead, pause, not as a strategy, as a practice. In the 1 second of that pause, ask yourself one question. Not, how do I respond to this? That is the question of a man managing a situation. Ask instead, who do I want to be in this moment? That is the question of a man with an identity. And the answer, whatever it is, will come from a completely different place than a defensive reaction or an anxious capitulation. Gottman's research shows that couples who master what he calls the gentle startup, the ability to enter a difficult conversation from a place of calm rather than escalation, have a 96% better long-term outcome than couples who do not. 96%, not from having fewer problems, not from being more compatible, from the specific practice of remaining regulated at the beginning of difficulty rather than matching the emotional temperature of the moment. That regulation, that practiced stillness, is a skill. It is built the same way every other skill is built. Through repetition, through the daily practice of choosing your response rather than being governed by your reaction. Through the personal work, the training, the journaling, the honest conversations with yourself, that develops the internal ground that friction cannot dissolve. You cannot fake it. Gottman's cameras prove that, because the physiological data does not lie, but you can build it, and the building of it is the most important work any man in a relationship, or preparing for one, can do. Before the final truth of this video, I want to pause one more time and ask you directly. If Prime Within has been giving you the kind of content that moves the needle in your actual life, not just the content that feels good to consume, but the content that changes how you think and how you behave, please subscribe right now. Hit that notification bell and share this video with one man who is currently being tested by a woman he cares about and has no idea what is actually happening. You might be the reason he finally understands. Subscribe now, and let's finish this. Here is the final truth, and I want you to carry this with you long after this video is over. Women test men not because they are adversaries, not because they are playing games, not because they are difficult or irrational or trying to create problems where none exist. They test men because they are intelligent, because they have something genuinely valuable to give. Their trust, their presence, their genuine partnership, and they are not willing to give it to a man who has not demonstrated that he can hold it. The test is not a hoop to jump through. It is a question being asked by someone who actually wants the answer to be good. She is not hoping you fail. She is hoping you pass. She is hoping that the man she has been showing up for turns out to be exactly who he appeared to be, that the patience is real, that the confidence is grounded, that the warmth does not disappear when the friction arrives. And the man who understands this, who hears the test not as an attack, but as a question, responds differently, not because he has learned the right words, because he has built the right foundation. He has done the work that makes the answer to her question genuinely good, not performed, real. John Gottman spent 40 years measuring what makes love last, what makes attraction deepen instead of fade, what separates the men whose partners look at them after 20 years with something that still resembles the feeling of the first year. And at the end of all that research, all those hours of footage, all that physiological data, the answer is both simpler and more demanding than anyone wants it to be. Be who you are, all the way through, under pressure, under friction, under the weight of the difficult moments that real partnership inevitably produces. Not who you perform when things are easy, who you are when they are hard. Build that man every day, in the private moments when no one is watching and nothing is at stake except the slowly accumulating weight of the choices you are making about who you are. Because that man, the one built in those moments, is the man who never fails the test. Not because he has learned how to respond to it, because he has become the answer to it. That is Prime Within. Subscribe now if you have not. Share this with someone who needs it. We will see you in the next one. Master yourself first. Build your legacy.